The field was frozen solid. A man knelt in the dirt, hands cracked and bleeding, pulling at a turnip that would not come loose. His breath hung in the winter air like smoke. His wife had died 3 days before. Fever. There was no medicine, no mercy. Just a shallow grave behind the hut, and a lord who still demanded his grain. This was not a tragedy. This was Tuesday. Across medieval Europe, millions of peasants lived and died in ways that history rarely remembers. Their names were never written down. Their graves were never marked. They existed only to serve. And when they could serve no longer, they vanished. Quietly, completely. But what did they actually die for? Not glory, not honor, not God, king, or country. They died for things far smaller, far crueler, far more ordinary. The first killer was hunger, not the kind of hunger that makes a stomach growl, the kind that hollows out a face, that makes children stop crying because they no longer have the strength, that turns fathers into thieves and mothers into ghosts. Medieval peasants ate what they could grow, barley, oats, rye. They turned these grains into dark, dense bread that modern mouths would find almost inedible. Meat was rare, a chicken was wealth, a pig was inheritance. But the land did not belong to them. It belonged to the Lord, and the Lord always took his share first. After the tithe to the church, 1/10 of everything, the peasant handed over another portion to his master. What remained was survival. Sometimes it was enough. Often it was not. When the harvest failed, there was no safety net, no stored reserves, no aid from above. The peasants simply starved. In the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, rains flooded the fields of northern Europe for 3 consecutive years. Crops rotted where they stood. Grain prices rose beyond anything a common man could afford. People ate dogs, cats, tree bark. Rumors spread of parents eating their own children. Millions died, not in battle, not by the sword, by bread that never came. The second killer was work. A peasant's body was not his own. It was a tool, used, worn down, and discarded. From the age of 7 or 8, children worked the fields alongside their parents. They carried, they hauled. They bent their small spines under loads meant for oxen. By 30, most peasants looked ancient. Their backs curved, their joints swelled, their lungs filled with the dust of 1,000 harvests. There were no doctors for them, no rest days, no retirement. Labor did not end when the sun set. A serf owed his lord not only crops, but time. Days of the week spent working the Lord's land for no compensation. This was called corvée, and it was law. A peasant could not refuse. A peasant could not negotiate. A peasant could only obey. They plowed in the rain. They harvested in the heat. They built walls, dug ditches, and cleared forests, all for the benefit of a man who would never learn their names. And when the body finally broke, when a man could no longer swing a scythe or lift a sack of grain, he was worth nothing. He became a burden, a mouth to feed with nothing to offer in return. Many did not wait for age to take them. They collapsed in the fields, where they fell from rooftops while repairing thatch. They were crushed beneath carts or trampled by horses. No one mourned them for long. There was no time. Another harvest was coming. The third killer was disease. Medieval peasants lived in darkness, literally. Their homes were cramped, windowless huts with floors of packed earth. Smoke from the central hearth had nowhere to go. It filled the room, blackening the walls, burning the lungs. They slept beside their animals, chickens, goats, pigs. The warmth kept them alive in winter, but the filth bred sickness, dysentery, typhus, tuberculosis, smallpox. These words meant nothing to them. They only knew the fever, the shaking, the blood, the way death crept in through the cracks and stayed. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, peasants had no defense, no understanding, no hope. They watched their families bloat with black swellings. They heard the screams of neighbors through thin walls. They saw bodies piled in the streets because there was no one left to bury them. 1/3 of Europe's population vanished in less than 5 years. And yet even in plague, the lords demanded their due. Even in death, there was debt. The fourth killer was violence. Peasants were not warriors. They carried no swords. They wore no armor. But war found them anyway. When lords quarreled, armies marched, and those armies needed food. They took it from the villages they passed through. Grain, livestock, sometimes women. Soldiers were rarely paid on time, if they were paid at all. They compensated themselves with plunder, and the easiest targets were always the ones who could not fight back. A single campaign could ruin a region for a generation. Fields burned, houses destroyed, peasants slaughtered for sport or simply for being in the way. Even in peace, violence waited. The Lord held the power of justice, and justice was not blind. It had eyes only for those who could pay. A peasant accused of theft could be hanged without trial. A serf who fled his land could be hunted down, branded, and returned in chains. A man who poached a deer from the Lord's forest because his children were starving could lose his hands, his eyes, or his life. The law did not protect peasants. It punished them. The fifth killer was birth. Women died in childbirth at staggering rates. There were no sterile tools, no trained surgeons, only midwives with herbs and prayers. When something went wrong, when the baby was turned, when the bleeding would not stop, there was little anyone could do. The woman either survived or she did not, and even if she lived, the child might not. Infant mortality was catastrophic. 1 in 3 children died before their 5th birthday. Disease, malnutrition, accidents, neglect born of desperation. A mother could bury 3 children and still be expected in the fields by dawn. This was not cruelty. This was life. Thus grief was a luxury no peasant could afford. The church promised salvation, but salvation came at a price. Peasants were told they suffered because God willed it. Their poverty was holy, their pain was penance. If they endured this life with faith, they would be rewarded in the next. But even heaven required payment. Tithes, offerings, fees for baptisms, marriages, and burials. The church owned vast tracts of land and collected rents, just like any lord. But it preached humility while its bishops wore silk. Some peasants found comfort in the rituals, the rhythm of mass, the flicker of candlelight, the promise that their suffering meant something. Others simply obeyed, not out of devotion, but because there was no other choice. To question the church was to question God, and to question God was to burn. Through all of this, the hunger, the labor, the disease, the violence, the loss, peasants endured. And they built the cathedrals that still stand today. They fed the armies that shaped nations. They cleared the forests, tilled the soil, and kept the world turning while kings played their games of thrones. And they were forgotten. No statues were raised in their honor. No songs were sung of their sacrifices. History remembered the conquerors, the saints, the nobles, but the hands that made it all possible, those hands were buried in unmarked graves, or beneath fields that still grow green each spring. They died for bread they could not eat, for land they could not own, for lords they could not defy. They died for nothing and everything. The peasant, kneeling in that frozen field, pulling at a turnip with bleeding hands, did not know he was part of history. He only knew the cold, the grief, the weight of another day. He pulled the turnip free, held it close, walked home. Tomorrow he would do it again, until one day he wouldn't, and no one would remember his name.